I finished the race, and to be completely frank, I haven't done any training whatsoever in the last 4 weeks. I've just been enjoying my off season because this year was the earliest I've ever raced, and this was the latest I've ever gone to a season racing. So we agreed to take a month off of training and just really freshen back up. But I can still place myself at the finish line of Waco and draw back on that energy and that motivation to move forward into this next year, 2019.
That is Justin Mendoza back on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. We are just coming off of our Thanksgiving feast, and I hope that all of you had a wonderful feast with your family, friends, or loved ones, whoever it was that you got to spend some time with last week. And I hope that if you were traveling or still are traveling, that you're not enduring too much pain and suffering sitting in traffic or airports or what have you. I am very, very excited to bring you this follow-up interview with what could be considered a podcast favorite, Justin Mendoza. He was on in the very, very early episodes of the Do It For Yourself podcast, and his podcast is actually still to this day getting downloads. And so when Justin reached out, I said, absolutely, I would love to have you back on, and I would love to hear what it is that you're up to and how your season just went. And we also got a chance to dive in deep on the very, very significant changes that were made for him this season. Probably the biggest one being that he gained guardianship, him and his wife, gained guardianship of their now 3 kids. And so Justin went from 0 to about 1,000 miles an hour in a very, very short period of time. So he was doing the balancing act of, early morning training, going to work all day, coming home and probably training into the late evenings, all while trying to balance, getting kids off to school, activities, etc. So we really get a chance to dive into, what changed for Justin and also how his season went, and how his A race, 70.3 Waco, went this year, and how he feels about this season and kind of what's to come and how he's looking at the overall picture for his quest on getting his elite or pro license. So without further ado, I bring you Justin Mendoza. Well, Justin, thanks so much for coming back, man. I really appreciate it, and I'd have to say that I think your original podcast was definitely one of the most popular ones, and I still get some hits that pop up on your show, and I think that people really enjoy that, and I think that people really enjoy your story. So if you are checking out this episode, you've come over here for this one. We are actually going to do more of a recap and kind of what Justin is up to now this season. So if you want to hear Justin's full story, how he got into triathlon, his motocross accident, all of that good stuff, go back and check out his original episode. I will link that below. But like I said, Justin, thank you so much for coming on again.
Yeah, it's really awesome to, I guess, move forward with the sport and even life in general. And then, like you said, be able to recap it and just kind of, I guess, keep going with the whole story and the progress of everything. So thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. And so if you could just give people, a little kind of background as to what you're up to. I know that, we, like I said before, we discussed your full story in detail in that first episode. So You don't have to necessarily get into too much detail about your story and how you got into triathlon, but kind of talk about your goals and where you would like to take triathlon, and kind of, that way it'll paint a little bit of a picture for what we'll talk about from this past season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my ultimate goal in this sport's to earn my elite license or a professional license. Um, yeah, I've always said I know for a fact I won't be making money in this sport. That's not the reason that I got into it. I just wanted to say that I got to a certain level and I was able to perform at that level. And that's obviously a long-term goal. When I first got into the sport, kind of like we talked about on the first episode, is I did my first race and then I was like, all right, I'm ready to make that step up to be a professional. Really had no idea the amount of time and effort and setbacks that it would take to get to that level. And honestly, I'm still, people can attest to this that have got to that level. It takes a long time. I think this is my fifth real consistent season. And within the season, I had some really nice, not even results, but like progression in each disciplines. But when you go to a bigger race, like an Ironman branded race or even a competitive Olympic distance race, you really see where you need to be at to perform at that level. So for me, like I said, it really is just each year or each season trying to get better in each discipline so that as a whole, it all comes together. And then eventually, hopefully within the next 2 or 3 years, I can bump up to that real competitive elite level and not show up and get spanked by, every single guy that's on that starting list.
And I guess we should put a caveat in there that, it is a process and it's something that, you have to take a couple years to work towards. Unless, of course, your name is Brandon Kraut, then, apparently it's a little bit easier for you.
Right. I think talking with my coach, he's always said, and I think most people would agree, that it's a 10-year progress, that 10,000 hour rule or the 10-year rule, where to really become good at something, doesn't matter what it is, it takes 10 years for most people to do it. I think in Brandon's case, just I stalking his story a little bit, he had a competitive background in running.
For sure. Yeah,
that's
for sure.
one discipline that he had already developed into something at a high level, and that's going to translate into the sports that he's doing now. Whereas someone like myself that comes into this sport relatively late in my 20s with zero endurance background, I'm starting from scratch. So it will, if it happens, if and when it happens, my guess is right around the 7, 8, 9, 10-year mark to actually be competitive and build up enough of a foundation to be competitive.
Yeah. And he was getting his digs in on you, calling you, saying you were catfishing. So we got to get some, we got to get a dig in on him where we can,
Justified payback.
So when you were setting up your schedule for this season, were you selecting races kind of based on your schedule, or were you selecting races based on your, I guess, chances in potentially qualifying for that elite license?
So for this year, I had thought there was 3 opportunities to go to a race and potentially earn that title of an elite. For me, there's a handful of pathways where you can qualify for the pro card. I've always thought that the criteria where you finish third amateur at a race that has a $20,000 pro purse would be the most likely event. Some of the other ways is going to like the age group nationals, and in placing well overall. I think I haven't really looked into it, but I think top 3 overall in that will get you the opportunity to claim your license. Another one's going to Kona and placing top 10 amateur. Those are very unrealistic, I guess, pathways that I would ever have an opportunity of getting it. One, I don't ever plan on doing Kona, or at least it never. And the guys that are winning that, or even probably top 10 overall, they really should have, in my opinion, should have their elite license. I mean, they're throwing down times that would probably get them money in a non-draft professional race. They're obviously racing sub 2 hours. They're running probably 35 or 34 minutes for their 10K off the bike.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very fit. They're very fast. And I just know for me, at the level that I anticipate at me racing one day, I won't be there. Like I said, I don't plan on making money as an elite. My goal is just to line up and hold my own.
Right.
So going to a race where you can finish top 3 amateur, as I said, would probably be the most realistic. And for me, the 3 races that I had picked this year was St. George 70.3, Boulder 70.3, and then the race I did 4 weeks ago in Waco, Texas, which was its first year. And that's another reason I thought I would do so well was there. It's a first year race. It's only a few weeks after the Ironman World Championships when most people had finished their season already. And oddly enough, I actually had my best performance at that race, but we can kind of talk about that as the conversation goes on.
Yeah, so I forget who it was that I talked to, but I've talked to a few people that say that sometimes, planning these things out, they plan them out strategically, just given, like you just noted on it there, Waco 70.3 falls after the Ironman World Championships, so a lot of people, their season is done. I know some people will race Ironman Arizona. A lot of people plan on doing Ironman Arizona because it's so close to Kona that a lot of the fast people who have already qualified for Kona, they just got done racing Kona, so they know that they're not going to be at Ironman Arizona. So people people kind of like schedule out their seasons depending on what other big races are going on as well.
Right, and I wouldn't say that's probably the best way to actually gauge where you're at, because if, let's say, 50% of the people that would normally be at the race are now putting their feet up for off season, or they have not recovered enough from a big race to really have a great performance at a race that's so close within their last race, it doesn't give you probably a true gauge of where you're at or where you need to be to race, for my example, as an elite. But at the end of the day, it's a race. You're going to go there to put yourself in a position to do well. Otherwise, you would just train all day. For me, I've heard people say, well, I'm just going to go have fun in this race. And that's great if that's what your goal is. But for me, it's actually to see where my results are on that specific day. So that takes a little bit of strategy.
Absolutely.
To have those results.
Absolutely. So. And I've even done it myself. Like I went a couple years ago, I knew that I wanted to go. I think it was when I wanted to go back to nationals. I had raced it the year before, and my race that I needed to qualify at in August didn't qualify me. So the following June, I had a race already on the calendar, and at that time, I could look at who was registered for some reason.
Right.
I can't do it anymore, but I didn't care who was registered. I was just looking at the numbers. And, for the age group race, there was only 10, I think it was maybe 10 guys that were registered in my age group for the Olympic distance. But there was like 30 guys or 40 guys registered for the sprint distance. So why not increase my chances? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
why
certainly.
not? Why not? Because I didn't necessarily – I was using that race as an avenue to get to something else, basically.
Right.
So I think that everybody does that. So now you said you had St. George on the schedule, and I've heard and seen that is it's an absolutely beautiful course, but it's also a very hilly course, especially for the bike. So do you think that is something that plays to your strengths, or do you think that that's something that can kind of cost you a little bit?
I think it goes both ways. For my body makeup, I'm relatively, I would say, small, maybe a little below average for, I guess, my height. I'm on race day right around 145 pounds, so I'm not super beefy by any means. Which is good for climbing. I mean, the less weight you're pulling uphill, the easier. There's less gravity in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But what you lack in the hills, or what you gain in the hills, you typically lack on the flats. I don't have a huge raw power number to time trial with guys that let's say are 180 pounds and are watts per kilo much stronger than me. Yeah, sure, their watts are going to be higher, but they probably also produce a higher overall I guess, threshold. So that really actually that race in the terms of the bike is it's a nice bike course until you get to the like mile 35. I think that's right around the area where you start climbing, and then you kind of have that famous climb Snow Canyon, which is definitely a grinder. So I'm not making a huge push forward on that course until I get to that part, and at that point the climbing's tough, but it's probably only 30 minutes overall of climbing. So if you've already given up, let's say 75 minutes to everyone else that's relatively stronger than you, you're not making a whole lot of time or damage up in that short span where you're going uphill. And then right after you get to the top, you have a nice descent back into transition. If someone makes more power than you, they're probably still going to get to that spot faster. I'm not sure when you and I had our first conversation if I had already done St. George the previous season in 2017. In my opinion, I really did not have a good performance at that race. I really let everyone, I guess, not decide my fate for that race, but I really took into people's opinions on that race. Everyone said how difficult the climbs are going to be, how hot, how hilly it was, and every race I go in with a plan that my coach and myself have printed up a blueprint essentially. Follow your nutrition, follow your power numbers, pacing for the run, and on that bike I had a plan. We had an idea of where I should be at, but I guess I always had a little voice in the back of my head saying, be prepared for Snow Canyon, be prepared for the climbs. So that whole bike ride, I really, really did not push it, which was frustrating that I let the little voice override the training and the work that I put in. This year, I said it would be different. I would go back and have a better performance. And I did and I didn't. I had a much better swim, and I had a really good run. It was actually, at the time, a PR for me. I went 132 on that run course. For what it is, I was happy with that. There's quite a bit of climbing in both directions. It's an out and back, so you experience really the same highs and lows in both direction. But the bike, I still really did not have a fantastic bike. Power-wise was pretty low. But in the terms of the performance, I was happy to have two, I guess, progressions in those disciplines. And overall, I went 20 minutes faster. So for 1 year of, I guess, consistent training and putting away some of those voices, I was happy to see a nice PR. I went 437 overall that day, and that still placed me outside of the top 10 in my age group. I think that got me 11th, which just kind of shows how competitive that race is.
Holy cow! Yeah.
Yeah, I think the guy that won the overall, his name's Conrad. I think he went, I could be off, but like 408. And that was first amateur. And I think that beat quite a few of the pros as well. So again, it's one of those things where you can't get angry or upset because you never know who's going to show up, but it does kind of put it into perspective, the level of athletes that are showing up on that day. If a 437 on a hot hilly course only gets you 11th in your age group, it's just, I'm assuming kind of like age group nationals. It's just a different level of athletes that are showing up on that day.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, listen, I go to age group nationals just like you said, to see where I match up, because ultimately I would like to finish, in the top 25 or better for my age group, to get my Team USA kit. Like, so,
Yep.
So do I know next season that I'm going to go? Well, probably not. Like you said, it's a 10-year process to get good. And given my background, it's probably going to be on the higher end of 10 years for me to get good and get competitive. But I want to see where I match up. I want to see where I have to get better.
Yeah,
so,
and that's sorry.
No, you're good. I just wanted to say, so like, just to kind of go off of that, like, I know that after age group nationals and even after some, even just regular, just a race that I'm using kind of like you said as a training day and a chance to like see where I stand and how my training's been doing. I always have conversations with my coach. So, after 70.3 St. George last year, and then, even after this year, when you finish that race with a 20-minute PR, which is huge, by the way. Did you have like a conversation on what you wanted to adjust, or did your coach have anything that he said like, hey, this is what, looking at your numbers where we could adjust, to get you closer to where you want to be?
The I think me and John, my coach, are very yin and yang. He's all about the process. Put in the work, be consistent. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing I've taken away from John is consistency is king always. It doesn't matter what level those workouts are. One thing that we really adjusted towards the end of this year is getting rid of superhero workouts. Don't show up one day to have this massive, crazy workout, but then you're stuck in a hole for the next 3 or 4 days because you can't absorb that workload. So after that race, really the biggest thing was keep moving forward. Don't let, and I can't say don't let a bad race because it was a good performance. I was
Right.
happy with 2 of the 3 things, but it was just keep showing up because, I mean, look what happened in 1 year. We went 20 minutes faster, and it's not like I've been doing this sport for 1 year. To have a 20-minute PR and this be my 5th season, I mean, that speaks volume. I mean, that's still a really good push forward. So, I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of negative things to say when you look at it in that mindset. It really was just keep moving forward, keep not even grinding, because in my opinion, if you grind, that's kind of a term that people use for training, that creates friction, and eventually friction breaks down. So it really was just keep enjoying the process, keep showing up, and whatever your results are long term, you'll get there. It takes time, and I'm learning to accept that because the type A personality in me wants results now. I'm like, all right, I've been doing this 5 years. I feel like I've sacrificed a lot for this sport. Why am I not seeing a first place overall in getting my pro card? But that's not how it works. I've heard Crowy, my hero, say this sport owes us nothing, and it really doesn't. It's not like we're entitled to this vision that we have. We have to go out there and earn it and keep showing up and staying healthy. So that's kind of what we took away is just keep showing up. And if my goal is to, like I said, just like a broken record, get my pro card, it'll happen. It just takes time.
And so going off of that sacrifice that you've made for the sport, you've also had to make some sacrifices this season, and there's been quite a few changes that have happened this season for you, and I'm sure that has probably affected some of your training schedule and everything else. Even like today, you're like, hey, can we schedule this early?
Yeah.
Because I have to watch the kids, this afternoon when my wife goes to work. So, talk to me a little bit about what's going on this season and the custody that you've taken of the kids and everything that's going on.
Yeah. So after Boulder 70.3 last year, which was a really good race for me. We ended up taking guardianship of my wife's oldest niece, Haley, who's now 13. She was in a really terrible living environment. She was actually kind of circulating through the foster system because of a few things that had happened in her personal life with her family. And we were at the point where after she went to, I believe, her second foster family, we're like, this is not fair to her. She's, she doesn't deserve any of this. So we're going to go ahead and step up and provide her with a home. So after that race, which was really from like a selfish standpoint, a really good timing of an event because my season was done. We had quite a few months until we started getting serious about training again. So I was able to focus on getting Haley squared away with school, getting her set up with some therapy sessions, just getting a routine set in place so that she could adjust to this new lifestyle and this new a whole new state, actually, because they grew up in California. So like I said, we got Haley last year. It would have been probably in September. And actually nothing else really changed in the terms of training, or even my overall, I guess, day to day procedures. I don't know, call it what you will. Besides finding time for Haley to play sports now, get to school on time, do the things that she needed to do. Really, the big change was in what would have been about July of this year, maybe even August. We actually ended up taking guardianship of her other two niece and nephew. So from a changing standpoint, it was pretty substantial. It was pretty quick. We went from one 13-year-old to now having a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and now, or I shouldn't say now, but plus Haley, our 13-year-old. So from a parenting standpoint, we learned very quickly what it's like to have a teenager and then also young children all running around the house. I don't know if we want to skip forward or not, but that was a big life adjustment, just trying to get everything figured out in our day-to-day routines.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. So July and August, that's like you're talking. This is peak training for Waco 70.3. Like
It was.
you are getting primed for Waco 70.3 right now. And I know there was a couple times where, I would post out on Instagram and, ask people how they're feeling for today, like 1 through 10, how you feeling? And you would never give me a number, but you would always just respond and say tired.
Tired.
So,
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about like what was going on. And, your commute is long. You have a long commute for work back and forth.
Right.
So, you have this long commute, plus you're trying to fit in training, and then you have 3 kids at home, which I'm sure the 13-year-old probably at times is like, yeah, whatever, but you have the 2 younger ones that you have to entertain. So
Yeah. So if we move back a little bit, as far as my work goes, as I said in our first conversation, I had been commuting to Denver for the last year. I guess at this point it'd be 2 years now, working for Performance Bike. And at that point, I was a assistant store manager at one of the locations in Denver. Back in May, right after St. George, my district manager at the time gave me the opportunity to become a store manager, which I gladly accepted. That being said, my commute did not change, although it was a different location and a bit different of a direction. The mileage was still the same. I still drive 65 miles in one direction. So as far as my free time goes, that's it can be up to 3 hours a day that I'm losing with traffic. I don't know what your situation with driving back east is like, but Denver can be terrible. I mean, it could be 4 accidents within a 2-mile span, and you're sitting on the freeway where you should be doing 75, 80 miles an hour, and we're not even moving. And then that gets super, super frustrating. You wouldn't think that driving a car is stressful, especially when you're not even driving, you're just sitting there. But let me tell you, it is so frustrating when you're trying to get to work, or let's say you've left your house 2 hours early to go get some training and some workouts in, and then you're like, well, now I'm not even going to get this workout in because it took me 2 hours to get to work today. So, that set aside, I had moved into the manager position, and that was, in my opinion, more life stress. Although I'll say my staff below me does a phenomenal job at their duties. As a store manager, everything falls on you. So if something goes wrong, if there's a customer service issue, let's say something falls through the cracks, I mean, that all comes back on you, and you're the one that has to answer to that. So I guess if we go off what Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. As a higher position, that just takes away some of the lackadaisy feelings you have at work, because now you're not really on edge, but you're just making sure you're overseeing everything at this point. As far as my racing went this year, it really didn't have a whole lot of negative impacts on it, in my opinion. Being in the store manager position, I'm able to create the schedules. Obviously, I take into account what everyone else needs for their days off, or if they request a certain day off. But I was able to build schedules around training, the hours that I was going to come in, or the days that I needed off on the weekends to go do maybe a long ride or even race. That was nice to have the flexibility to create that and allow myself to, I guess, have a leg up, or you're kind of at the mercy of the schedule. You really are working around that. If we move forward to Boulder 70.3, which is in August, that was 2 weeks before we got the addition to the family, the 2 other children. And in my opinion, that was the worst race I've ever had in my life. It was a huge life change. We were adjusting to sleep schedules. I had gotten sick for the first time in like 2 years, which I think is an indicator that I was stressed out. I mean, typically your immune system gets jeopardized when you're, really stressing, and I believe that's what happened to me. That race, it really reflected it. I had a great swim, and then as soon as I got out the water, I really had nothing for the bike. And probably the closest I've ever been to pulling out of a run. It's a 2-loop course, and after that first run, I was like, this would be so easy just to stop what I'm doing and lay down and just move forward with the next adventure, which would have been Waco. We stuck it out. I finished the second loop, and oddly enough went 20 minutes slower than the previous year. But it just kind of shows what stress will do to you on an athletic level. It really plays a huge role in your immune system, kind of your mindset as well. I know I can think back and put myself on the bike and have those negative thoughts. As someone passed me, I'd be like, well, you're not dealing with what I'm dealing at home, so I'm okay with you passing me. And that just creates a real negative impact on your performance.
Now,
so that was heavy.
Can I ask you a question about that
Yeah.
as well? So coming post Boulder 70.3, leading into Waco, taking out, being sick, there's nothing that you can really do to control that. I mean, you're going to get sick when you're going to get sick. But as far as managing some of the other stressors and looking at scheduling and, how things are going to shake out, like, when we were scheduling this podcast, it seemed like you had a really good grip on your schedule. You're like, okay, well, I have this and this going on, and here's my days off, and here's the timeframes that I can do. So what adjustments did you make to your scheduling, and especially working with your wife, to get everything kind of set?
So I would say right before Boulder, because it was so raw, it was so fresh, I only had 2 weeks until that race, where from like a fitness standpoint, I was probably in the best shape that I've ever been in. But from a day-to-day standpoint, I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to help Jess in the mornings get the kids situated for school, trying to figure out their sleep patterns, because this is a completely new environment for them. They were waking up multiple times a night to come in and maybe look for that nature, nurture, love. Are you guys still here in your bed while we're sleeping? So, from a 14-day out perspective, there was no chance to really dial in what my taper should have been like. Post Boulder, we had 12 weeks of a build into Waco, and that just really allowed me to figure out what I could do with my extra free time, or with my time that I could use for training. And what that really meant was extremely early mornings, and for the most part, extremely late nights. I think I listened to one of your podcasts with Jeremy. He earned his pro card and was mentioning that most triathletes are willing to wake up very early. And he kind of made the comment that he was still adjusting to those early mornings, where I felt like I was very similar. Previous to the kids, I felt like 6:30 waking up was an early morning for me. Moving forward into this build that we had in Waco, 3:55, 4 o'clock was my early mornings, and that meant getting anywhere from a triple to a quad shot in me of espresso, and then getting on the trainer or heading to the pool. So you're getting your workouts in relatively early. Then you commute, or I would commute my 75 minutes to work, do my 8-hour shift, drive back home with could be another 75 minutes, and then doing another workout. So it's up at 4 and you're done by hopefully 9:30, maybe 10. And if you do the math, that doesn't add up to 8 hours of sleep. That's
Yeah.
for the most part less than that. And another key component I've always taken on my coach is you can do all the work you want, but if you can't absorb that workload, then it's going to do nothing. You're going to end up putting yourself in a hole. You're probably going to get hurt. Mentally, you may burn out. So it was a real big adjustment for Waco, or I should say after Boulder 70.3, we took a complete week off. It was just trying to readjust with the kids, try and evaluate what the time could be like for training, where I could give away some time, where I could make up some time. And then we built our 11-week build into that race. And into that race, it was probably the most difficult thing I've done in terms of training. I had 8 weeks where I took one day off. I threw absolutely everything at the wall that I could. I did not want to leave any ounce of energy with training and show up to that race and say, what if? So that meant, really early mornings, really late nights. And like you were saying, you would ask how people are feeling for the races, and I would just respond tired. And that's how I was. It was physically tired. I was mentally tired into that race. It was one of those cliches where the journey just sucked. I really was not having a ton of fun waking up every single morning like, all right, well, it's time to go suffer. But that being said, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. That was the race that all that energy and effort went into. And I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but that race was the best race I've ever had in the terms of a half Ironman. It really shined on race day that all that effort and sacrifice for that race paid off. And it, in my opinion, it totally made it worth it. It was difficult, and I had to get rid of a lot of my free time to invest in that training, but I was really, really pleased with what the outcome was.
Now, talk to me a little bit about what kept you going through that time, because as you said, a lot of people say grinding, and if you think about grinding, like grinding a stone together,
Yeah.
like that doesn't sound fun. But what were some of the things that kind of kept you going? Because I know, yes, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, there's this race, but even still, for some people, that's not enough. So did you have more? Was there something that you could pull from that kept you going through that time?
I mean, honestly, it probably was just the motivation to never have a race like Boulder again. And like we mentioned a few minutes ago, there was things that I couldn't control in that race. Being sick was one of them. Having a huge life change was the biggest one. But the feelings I felt at the finish line were so raw. I mean, I cried a lot after that race. There was just emotions that would overcome my current mindset, and I would just start crying. I was like, I had a great season. Every single race going into that race, I had shown progress, and this race that I was in fantastic shape for was a huge step backwards in my mind. I mean, it wasn't. I still showed up and executed an okay race with everything that was in the picture at that time. But I think most triathletes can agree we're so driven by results, and we're such a slave to the numbers that to see slower times and a lower power output and a slower run pace, it was super difficult to say that was my end result for a full summer of training. So, moving forward into Waco, I was like, I'm never going to let myself race like that again, or at least I'm going to do everything in my power to not let myself race like that again. And I mean, I can still think back to those 4 a.m. mornings when I'm on the foam roller, getting ready to get on the bike, thinking, God, it would just be so nice to crawl back into bed and go to sleep for, 2.5 hours before I have to work my way up to Denver for work. But there's guys in my age group, there's guys overall that are doing the same exact thing right now. I have to do it. I mean, if I'm gonna say I want to do everything in my power, then I have to put up, shut up. I have to go do that. I have to go do my job, and that's what it was. It was just setting aside the lack of energy, and just finding that extra motivation or gear, just repeating what I had set out for myself, and just doing it. Another real big factor, I would consider him now a good friend, Chad. He's a professional triathlete. Last year, he moved to Colorado Springs, and I was able to hook up with him in my build for this last race, and that was a huge component to that extra, I guess probably 1 or 2% in training. You can go train by yourself every single day, but you're probably not always maximizing your effort if you're solo, and having someone, especially someone that races as a professional, to give you that 1 or 2% you need to get the most out of your workouts was, in my opinion, huge. I don't know if Chad would want me to talk about his story, but he was coming off an injury. He ended up tearing his ACL. So I would say his base level fitness for where he was at for my build was very similar to my peak fitness. So we had a real good, I guess, connection in the terms of our athletic ability at the time, which was very helpful.
And I wanted to ask you one more thing just about your build before we get into the actual Waco 70.3.
Yeah.
You said that you had only taken one day off, right?
Yeah.
And now just for the age group triathlete, maybe even the beginner triathlete who is just getting into this sport, and even the non-triathlete, but the person who's just training, for weight loss or whatever it may be. Can you clarify, when you say that you only took one day off, I'm assuming that's one day without doing anything.
Besides work, yeah. I mean,
Right.
zero athletic training.
Okay.
Nothing to do with swim, bike, run.
But during your build, did you have days where you were doing a recovery swim or a recovery ride, or you weren't going and doing, 800s on the track, or, hard treadmill workouts, or super long, hard intervals at, 95% of your FTP? Like, there were some things in your schedule built in that, yes, you were doing some sort of swim, bike, or run, but even like you just said, you were foam rolling.
Yeah.
You're doing things like that. I just want people out there to know that even though you're saying that you only took one day off completely from exercise or swim, bike, run training, there were days built into your schedule where you were not going hard. It was purposely a day to recover and absorb some of the training that you were doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The days on a weekly basis that I would normally take off, or as you mentioned, completely off from training. You're absorbing the last 6 days, mentally freshening up for another 6 days of training. I obviously eliminated that day, but that involved getting on the trainer and spinning at 95 beats per minute and maybe 100 watts on the bike. So by no means am I on there smoking myself
Right.
7 days in a row and then repeat. I mean, it was just getting on there to spin my legs, to keep the blood flowing. Yeah, I mean, by no means was it strenuous at all. It was just a way for me to, I guess, just keep moving forward, even if it was only 45 minutes of super, super simple spinning. That was, in my opinion, 45 minutes that I would not have had. And like I mentioned, I wanted to throw everything at the wall and see what stuck. And we were going to adjust if there was ever a point where I felt like I was moving backwards, or an injury was coming on, or mentally at the point where I just could not fathom going to do a 60-minute easy ride, then we clearly would have adjusted that. But I never felt like that. I mean, I had a lot of motivation going into this race to perform at a certain level, and that kept the ball rolling in that direction. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I never had like a superhero workout. There was never a day where I was doing 5 hours of exercise at threshold, or close to threshold. It was a true 80-20 rule, where 80% of my training in that 8 weeks was zone 2, so relatively easy, all endurance based stuff, and then 20% of the time it was miserable. I mean, it would have been zone 4, zone 5, past threshold, and those are the days where it can make or break you. But as I said, my coach is really good at planning everything out. He's really keen on what my day-to-day lifestyle is with the children. So it worked out. I mean, looking back now, I was like, God, some of those days were tough. That those 20% days when we were going really past the threshold and digging deep. That was really difficult from an athletic and a mental standpoint, but it all worked out. And I think people that do something similar, probably like a Kona build, or even for yourself where you're really dialing in your training for age group nationals, there's times where it's gonna suck. But at the end of the day, if you did it correctly, most of the time you see the benefits of it, and it did. So
now, leading up to August, and this point where the conversation may have started to come in about adopting the other two kids, and you already have the 13-year-old. Was this a mutual conversation and something that you and your wife both talked about, and were there any points where you thought, man, this is going to be really difficult, like is there any way that we could push this back, or like what was that conversation like? And I mean, I know that, don't take that as insensitive, like obviously when you're talking about a child, you don't want to put them in a place, but was it something that you were kind of like thinking about in your head, like, man, this is gonna be really, really hard?
absolutely, it was a conversation we had probably for like 2 weeks. How, if you get rid of like the emotional connection in there, wanting to provide nature, nurture, love for our new family, if you go from a financial standpoint, it's like, what is going to happen? Do I make enough at my job now to provide of enough, I guess, revenue to pay for our mortgage? Now we are going to have 2 more mouths to feed. There's no way that Jessica will be working full time at this point to be able to take in enough money, and still have the flexibility to pick the kids up from school. One thing that I did not mention, Derek is kind of our miracle baby. He really shouldn't even be alive. He's already had 3 open heart surgeries. He has some medical issues. So the amount that my wife Jessica has done to make sure that his needs are taken care of is it's incredible. I mean, he sees multiple doctors a week, a cardiologist, neurologist. He goes to therapy for walking so that he can make certain muscle groups fire. All his motor skills get worked on every single week with someone, and then his normal therapy to help from an emotional standpoint. Although he's only 5 and he doesn't understand what's going on, it's still there. You, as a 5-year-old, you have been around your biological mother and father for 5 years, so you expect to see that face, and now he's in a different state and doesn't see those faces every day. There's going to be some negative impacts on that. So she had to step away from working 5 days a week, her 8-hour shifts, to fill that void, to be able to provide the children with those services that they need to, I guess, progress forward. But it's pretty incredible. The last, I don't know, we've had the children now for, I guess, 3 months. How far they've progressed in the last 3 months, opposed to the first 5 to 7 years of their life. It's pretty shocking what they lacked in their last home environment compared to what they have now. So yeah, it's a lot, and it's difficult, I would say, most of the time, but they actually have a fighting chance now, which is probably the most rewarding thing. They are, in my opinion, in our opinion, going to have the most success with what we're able to provide them now, opposed to what they had in their first half of their life.
Now, everybody went to Waco with you, right? For the Waco race.
Yeah, including the dog. So what should have been an 11-hour drive to Texas ended up being like 16 and a half on the way there. And then originally, when we had booked our hotel room, it would have been like in February of the beginning of this year. We had only anticipated on having Manna the dog, Haley, our 13-year-old, and then myself and Jessica. So we had only booked 2 twin-size beds as the year rolled on into August, and we got guardianship. We had a much larger family, and at that point, all of the rooms in the hotel that we got were already booked. So we had a whole lot going on in a very small room in Texas.
Now, dragging everybody down, I shouldn't say dragging, but bringing everybody down there with you, including wife, kids, dog. Um, did you feel an immense amount of pressure to perform, or were you going in calm, as calm as you could be, relatively speaking, but calm, collected, and just ready to see where your training could take you?
Yeah, no, I honestly have never felt pressure from Jessica to perform. I mean, she knows the reason that I'm in this sport and what my goals are, but regardless of the race, she's always there at the finish line with open arms and encouragement. I mean, she was happy with my race at Boulder. Like I mentioned, I was in a pretty dark place after that race. I was pissed and upset and angry, and just wanted to really to forget about that race and get that off of, I guess, my radar, not to have to think about that race. As far as the kids go, this is all new to them. They've never been around anything like this. So showing up to an Ironman branded races where you have 3,000 people racing, all these different vendors, there's music playing, there's, expo with the bikes and the nutrition, free samples. They were loving it. I mean, they were getting their little cups with base nutrition in it, their drinks, and going around getting free Cliff Bars and yada yada yada. They were enjoying it. So from a pressure standpoint, no pressure there. From a personal standpoint, absolutely. I mean, I was like I said, I did not invest all this energy into these last 8 weeks to show up and have a subpar race or even a par race. I wanted an exceptional race, and that puts a lot of pressure on yourself to perform.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Like, I'm sure that your family and everyone else around you wasn't putting the pressure on you, but did you put the pressure on yourself to say, like, I've done all this work. I'm bringing them down here with me. We're making this sacrifice to drive down here and, pack everybody in the car. And like you said, it's, a 11, 12-hour drive turned into a 16-hour drive. Like, were you really putting the pressure on yourself? Like, I can't show up and just have, a mediocre day or even, like an average day. Like, I have to have the best day that I have ever had.
Yeah. And I kind of mentioned Chad earlier. He's also a coach. I was still going off of John's planning every single day, but talking with Chad, able to pick his brain because he's been doing this such a long time. It was just another, I guess, outlet of information to kind of pick onto. And he had created a best bike split profile for me to, I guess, give me an overall number of what I needed to produce to do the time that I had in mind. He had raced races similar to Waco and gave me an idea of what I needed to run to be up front during the race. It was just, it plays a different dynamic because I would say talking with Chad and picking his brain, it's more result driven. You put in this effort, this is the result that you should be performing at. When I'm talking with John, it's every single day being consistent and your results will follow. We're not going to base Waco off of finishing third amateur. We're going to base Waco off you executing this bike split and this run split. Whereas with Chad, it's like, we're going to execute, or you need to execute at this level to have this result. So you have, in my opinion, two completely different mindsets or ways of racing. But for me, both of those voices were super beneficial. Like I said, kind of a yin and yang situation. It was, in my opinion, very helpful to have that in my corner, something to draw off of.
And so it's almost like they balanced each other out instead of
Absolutely.
having this like ping pong match in your head of who I should listen to. You kind of were able to balance those two differing approaches, let's say, and kind of take what you needed out of both of them.
100%. It was like having a power meter in your heart rate. There's lots of variables with heart rate, and then let's say with different elevation, you're going to have different power outputs because there's more or less oxygen. But if you can put both of those together, you're really going to have a great chance at a good bike. And that's what I felt like I was getting out of my coach, John, and having Chad, I would say, advise me. He was there to provide information that I would typically not be getting out of training.
And so, ultimately your goal was to be what, the third amateur overall,
third amateur
at Waco,
yep,
which it kind of doesn't matter where you place in your age group, right? It's just really, I guess more or less.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, you finish third in your age group, because if 1 and 2 finish first and second, then
right.
You're third. You can do the math, obviously, but yeah, worst case scenario would have been third age group, but really the goal was third overall.
And where did you end up that day? I mean, I was tracking you, but for the listeners here,
yeah,
where did you end up that day?
not quite either one of those. Overall, I think I was 11th. I could have been 13th. I didn't. Once I realized I was not third overall amateur, I kind of threw that out the window. And then 6th in my age group. Mm-hmm. We can talk a little bit more about the race, but as soon as I had finished the race, I crossed the line and asked the timing officials, where am I at? What did I do? And the official said, you're 4th overall in your 4th age group. I'm like, oh my God, I'm one spot away from my huge ultimate goal with this sport. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I made the podium. I'm content with that. That's great. Unfortunately, the Waco race was a 69.1. There was no swim because of the river. So they had us do a time trial bike start, and that does not give you an idea of who you're racing within that race. If anyone's familiar with Ironman's all-world athlete program, they base you in a category, either gold, silver, or bronze, off your previous year's results. And this last year I had been placed in that silver ranking system, which gave me a very low bib number. There was, I think, close to 3,000 people racing in that race, and I was bib number 275, whereas everyone else in my age group that had not earned a all-world ranking athlete ranking, they were closer to like the 2,500 range. So when I took off, I was at relatively close to the front of the race, so you have no idea who you're racing the whole time. Everyone in front of you has earned that I guess division or ranking, call it what you will, and that's a huge change in age groups, because there's guys that are anywhere from 18 to 24 age group all the way up to the, I mean, who knows, I guess 60 to 64 age group. Yeah. There's nothing saying that you're racing someone in your age group. So like I said, when I finished, overall, I had finished 4th, and I was super, super pumped on that. But that leaves another, let's say, hour of people who started behind you to still race on the course. And as time went on, it had dropped me back to, like I said, either 11th or 13th overall and 6th in my age group, which was like, gosh, that's so frustrating to, I mean, one, see all these people that started after me finishing better than me, but 2, come all the way to Waco, Texas, in my opinion, have a fantastic race, and then not even come home with hardware. It's like, that was a little mental dig. But on the flip side, it was, like I said, it was the best race I've ever had. I executed, in my opinion, a fantastic bike. I did not let anyone either pass me on the course and alter my plan in the terms of output. And on the run, it was the first time that I've never had to walk through aid stations. Every half Ironman I've ever done, I've felt the need to take a 10-second break or so in transition to slow down, take in nutrition, let my legs get a 10-15 second break, and then start up again, and then repeat every single aid station. For the first time in racing a half Ironman, I didn't have to do that. I was able to go through every aid station at the pace that I was intending to run, and that was just a nice progress forward. It just showed that 8 weeks of training really paid off.
And so, as I guess maybe disappointing as it could be, to miss that spot, and I mean, you also have to take into consideration that the swim was canceled, so
right,
that could have been a lot of those guys that may have been up there with your bike split. The swim could have taken a little bit more out of them. There's so many factors that
Right.
we don't know the answers to. But overall, how did you feel after Waco 70.3 as compared to Boulder 70.3?
So last year's Boulder 70.3 in 2017 was the best race I've ever had. It was the first time I went sub 430. I went 427 on that course. That was the first time that I had run sub 133. So I ran a 132 on that rolling course. And I did I don't know what the bike split was, but the average speed, I know the average speed was 23.8. I was very stuck on that number because it was the first time I've gone, almost 24 miles an hour for the bike split. And I was super, super pumped with that. For Waco, I had even better results, for this race. The overall bike was a 219 split. My training peak shows that the course was a tad long. It was 56.8, so almost 57 miles. And I averaged 24.5 miles an hour. The biggest thing for me was for that bike split and that average speed, I only averaged 217 watts. So if anyone knows wattage, that's like a really low number.
Yeah.
The important thing is your watts per kilo, because someone that weighs more than me is most likely going to produce a higher number.
Right.
They weigh more, they have to produce more power to maintain that effort. But from a watts per kilo perspective, that was only 3.1 watts per kilo, whereas most competitive people that are racing at the front of a race are closer to 4 watts per kilo, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. So I was really low on that spectrum. So in my opinion, and I think most people can agree, that means my bike fit was extremely efficient. My equipment choice on that day was extremely efficient. My overall, I guess, setup for the race was really fine-tuned, because there was people that I've talked to who'd had a similar bike result, and they were much closer to like the 260, 270 range.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a huge difference in power. I've been asked, well, what kind of power meter are you using? Could it potentially be reading low? That's just such a low number to do that speed. And I mean, not going into like brands or anything, but I have a Cork. It's up to date on its firmware and everything. So it's not like it's a super entry level power meter. It's considered a gold standard.
I was gonna say that's like top of the line almost.
Yeah.
Like it's crank based. It's not single arm.
Yep.
Like, yeah, we're talking up there. So.
Right. And then coming off the bike, it was the first time, like I said, that I've never had to walk in transit or aid stations on the run. I remember coming off the bike, and there's a young lady professional, Rachel, who I follow on social media, and we took off at the same time for the run, and we talked for, I wouldn't say talking, it was more of like kind of yelling and trying to recover, because you're already kind of out of breath. But we had a small conversation. And I felt really good. I was like, wow, this could be promising. And about halfway through that first mile, I was able to kind of surge forward, and I was like, all right, well, she's a professional. I've seen her results. I'm going to try and stay in front of her for this full run. That would be a really good, I guess, benchmark or goal to obtain. And by that first mile, your Garmin, or I use a Garmin, it reads off your mile, and I was running at 619. Like, oh, okay, this is too fast. There's no way I can maintain a 619. I've never even done a 619 average for an Olympic distance at this point. So I backed off a little bit. But like I said, every single mile that I was running, I felt really good. And I was taking in a lot of salt. It was the first time I was using salt like every 3 to 7 minutes, just taking a dab and just keeping it in my system. And I really think that was a huge component. I have absolutely no affiliation with Base, the nutrition company, but I swear that stuff is like my savior. It's incredible what it does for me while I'm at a big effort. And in the terms of my overall run, it was the first time I've ran a half or a 13-mile run off the bike, sub 130. I ran 129 and some change, which was like a 652 or 653 average. And I was super pumped with that. I mean, like I said, it wasn't the result I was looking for. I was looking to place higher, but in the terms of overall progress, it was, in my opinion, a huge step forward. It really
showed that all that effort and training paid off.
Yeah, and I mean, just that's like I said before. There's things that again, unfortunately, were out of your control that could have either played to your strengths, or who knows, they may have played towards some weaknesses.
Right.
So but to come away, I think to come away with a a result that you are happy with, I think that's going to put you in a better mental state going forward and going into your off season and kind of starting to think about next year.
Absolutely. It was one of those things where, excuse me, I finished the race, and I, to be completely frank, I haven't done any training whatsoever in the last 4 weeks. I've just been enjoying my off season, because this year was the earliest I've ever raced, and this was the latest I've ever gone to a season racing. So we agreed to take a month off of training and just really freshen back up. But I can still place myself at the finish line of Waco and draw back on that energy and that motivation to move forward into this next year, 2019. And I mean, it sounds funny, but I feel like that 90-minute half Ironman run has been so elusive for such a long time. I've always felt like I've been fit enough to run there, and I haven't up until this race. So it's like I've set a standard for myself, and now I just need to build off of that. So it laid down a lot of confidence. And really the biggest thing that I take away from Waco was, although I was, quite a ways off of third amateur, I was only about 10 minutes off of third overall. Third overall they went 341 and I was 351. I was 10 minutes away, which in the big picture, yeah, 10 minutes is a long time. But if we go back a handful of months to St. George, I went 20 minutes faster this last year. So there's no reason in another year, keep working on bike fitness, keep running on run fitness. And let's say we throw a swim in there and I have a good swim, 10 minutes is not a lot of time. I mean, it's at a goal that's obtainable. It's not like I'm 45 minutes away and, I'm 10 years into this sport. I'm 5 years into this sport. And like I said, I only put out 217 watts on the bike. If I could push that up to 235 watts or 240 watts, that's a lot of time that I'll make up. So it's just a lot of positive motivation to go into the next season.
And so I know you haven't really done anything,
No.
looking at next season, but do you have anything race-wise on your radar that you're going to be going after?
So this last year, if we take kind of a step back, this was, like I said, the earliest I've ever raced, the latest I've ever raced, and it was actually the most races I've ever done in one season. We did the 3 halves, 2 sprints, and a handful of Olympic distances. That was 9 races altogether. And within that summer stretch, right before we got the kids, I was doing an Olympic distance every 2 weeks, which in the terms of seeing results or progressing in the sport, probably a little difficult because you're just racing so much. It provides you a really good foundation for, I guess, a race mindset. You're understanding where you could be faster in transition, how to set up your shoes faster on the bike, how to set up your running shoes faster so that you're out of transition faster. But in the terms of fitness, you're never able, or at least I was never able to really do like long 6-hour rides or 5-hour rides and then go race. We were kind of focused on that 2-hour racing stretch and then repeat because it was every 2 weeks. So for 2019, I'm definitely not going to race that much. I think I'm probably only going to race 4 times. One from a family standpoint, there's no need to drag the family around every 2 weeks to a race. The logistics to that would seem unfair, waking the kids up at 3:30 in the morning to go have a pretty long day at the races. So my goal for 2019 is to really focus on 4 half Ironmans. I don't know that I'll even do an Olympic distance next year, which is a distance I really enjoy. But like I said in our first conversation last year, it's not a distance that I don't think I'll ever get a pro card in. I just don't run fast enough off the bike. Yeah. So that being said, St. George 70.3 is on the radar. That will be my 3rd time going back there. So 3rd time's the charm for that race. I'm going to
I would like to sign up for a race called Try the Boat, which is in Steamboat Springs. Steamboat Springs is at 8,000 feet above sea level, so it's a very high up race, but it's also the Rocky Mountain Regional Long Course Championships. So I'd like to go do that and see where I'm at for, I guess, this area for long course. I'll go do Boulder 70.3 again because third time's the charm for that race. And then a late season half. So whether that's Waco again and take the chance of there possibly not being a swim again. I mean, I think that was kind of a fluke thing with all the rain that Texas got in that time span. But the other one would be Arizona 70.3, whereas that race isn't only an age group race. I don't think they have a professional field for the men, maybe not even the women. But that doesn't mean you're not going to have super fit guys showing up. So that could be a good one to kind of gauge fitness in the terms of overall age groupers taking out that pro men field.
So how does that work? If there is not a pro field, can you still qualify for your pro card?
Yes, but it would not be from that race by itself. So like I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, USA Triathlon has, I want to say 5 or 6 different pathways where you can earn your license.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the newest pathways that they created last year was every race that you do that's sanctioned by USA Triathlon, they give you an overall score.
Okay.
So for this newest pathway, if you do 2 races in one calendar year that has 600 participants and you get a score of 104 or better, you can take your pro card. So you cannot get your pro card by, let's say, doing very well at that single race. But if you do get a score of 104 at this race and you had a score of 104 at a previous race, then you could apply for the pro card.
And so that's like, is it 104 total, or is it 104 in just one race?
So it would just be the score for that race.
Okay.
So if you go on to USA Triathlon and you type in your name in athlete results, it's going to show every single race that you have done that's sanctioned by USA Triathlon. And then they're going to show you a score based on overall amateur field. Typically, overall amateurs, when there's a pro purse, like let's say St. George, for example, when Conrad won, I think he got a score of like 110. So he got a very large number for that race. Whereas myself, where I finished 11th in my age group and was way off the mark, I was like 25 minutes off his time. I got a score of 99. So I was 5 points away from what would be considered a elite level score. So it's complex. I really don't even understand how USA Triathlon creates their scoring. They say they have a method to it. But that's just one of the pathways that they created last year to apply for a pro license.
Yeah, they say they have a process or a system in place for everything. And last
year, it's like
year,
an algorithm, but I don't understand it.
Well, apparently, I guess last year, because people were bitching and complaining about how the age group waves were set up for the swim starts.
Yeah.
And so they were like, yeah, but we use this program and it's an algorithm and it tells us, like what age group should go when to, have the least amount of congestion on the bike course. So I guess apparently they have, an algorithm that they use for everything.
Right. So I think you mentioned this with Jeremy, or he mentioned it in your guys' podcast. Racing as an age grouper with that wave start can be difficult, because if it would have been a swim start at Waco, I would have been wave 16 of 18. So I would have been within my bib range number, the 2,500 area for racers, participants. But because they did that time trial start, I was able to go off my bib number, which was relatively low at like 275. So I could understand where the frustration lies in that. But on the flip side, it gives you a different dynamic, because if you're 2,500 in your start, that's a lot of people that you get to legally draft off of. You may not be sitting on their wheel the whole time, but every time you pass someone, you're getting a slingshot advantage. You're coming up, you're passing, you're coming up, you're passing, and that gives you a little bit of advantage every single time. So it's just a different dynamic. I don't know. We all have the same race, we all have the same course, but if you're racing by yourself out front and you don't know who's coming up behind you and you don't have anyone to chase, that's a different mindset than someone is, let's say, an hour behind you in their start time and they're passing and passing and passing. That's, in my opinion, going to give you a little more motivation to just keep pushing and catching people. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think starting with your age group, or, the other one is the wave starts, that I think works really well too, because you seed yourself and where you're going to end up, like, especially for the swim, and then you can kind of push it on the swim and hang with these guys who, or girls sometimes, that are going to, that are going to have a solid swim, and, that can kind of put you into a good place too. So, it's a game of strategy as well. That's
Definitely.
for sure. Like, you have to be prepared and you got to do the training, but
absolutely,
there's definitely some strategy involved. So, all right, man. Well, I know you have a busy day ahead of you today as well, with lots of activities going on. Daddy daycare is going to be...
We got daddy daycare
firing up pretty soon. So
Yep.
I'll let you get going. I do just want to say thanks so much again for coming on, and sharing a little bit of what's going on with you, and, giving us a little insight on this process, this journey that you're going on.
Absolutely. It's not from what I've learned, it's not what people make it out to be on social media. You see all these glamorous shots, and it's almost like a facade sometimes. So it's cool to really tell the story that you're actually living, and people get the other side of the perspective, the other side of the I don't know, the other side of the fence. Call it what you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate it. Thank you for having me back.
For sure. And I would have to say that it probably won't be the last time either. So
I hope not. Hopefully
we'll get reconnected.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
We'll get reconnected, and like I said, I'm keeping up with you and following you on social media the whole time. So it's great fun. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know about you, but I was getting tired just listening to Justin explain his training schedule and his travel schedule back and forth to work. That just sounds absolutely tiring to me. And I can understand why he was reaching out to me and telling me how tired he was when I was asking on Instagram, how people were feeling about their day. So if you could, please do me a favor, go over and let Justin know what you thought of this episode. I always ask you to leave your thoughts with me and let me know what you thought about it, but I would love for you to let Justin know as well what you thought about this episode. I really, really appreciate the people who have gone on and left a review. It's great to see, what people are saying about this show and how they feel about things and how everything's going, and the support it means a lot to me. So I want to say thank you for that. If you are interested in supporting the show, obviously, the number one thing that you can do is take a few minutes and leave a rating and review on whatever podcast app you use to listen to these shows. So if you are on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, however you do it, a rating and review is very, very helpful. So if you could take a minute to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. And the second way that you can support us is through our Patreon page, and that is patreon.com/doitforyourself. And it's patreon.com/doitforyourself. There's a few options on there. You can do $1, $5, $10, whatever the case may be. Anything that you can give is obviously going to help support this show and keep things moving. But until next week, and man, let me just tell you, next week's interview, it's going to be a good one. I have Bobby Maximus on the show next week, and if you do not follow him on Instagram, check him out now, because he's on the show and it's absolutely amazing. So until we meet up again for that episode, I hope that you all have an amazing week, and I look forward to hearing from you on your thoughts with this show, and I'll see you then.